Warehouse and operations as a career. I'm Marty, and I had pallets on my mind all this week. Thought we'd talk about that for a minute today. You know, back in March, we looked into the history of the skid or pallet, and we talked about how it came to be, why there's so many different sizes, and its importance in our industry. I think that episode was called The Pallet. Check it out if you've ever wondered why they are used as they are today. Anyway, so this week has been a week all about pallets for me. It feels like every conversation I've had this week was something to do with a pallet. You know, as an unloader, receiver, pallet runner, and put-away lift driver, we have the immense responsibility of checking and verifying that every pallet we touch or deal with, at our task, if not is in tip-top shape, that it's safe to be stored in our racks. And by the same token, as replenishment lift drivers, order selectors, and loaders, it's our job to make sure that all that empty wood is then separated at the end of our shifts into the good or reusable stacks and the broken, salvaged, or just plain broken to pieces stacks. I work with several large distribution centers that employ 1 or 2 pallet sorters or even 2 shifts of people that their sole responsibility is to separate the good and bad wood. The good pallets will of course be used next shift for the unloading process all over again, and the bad wood, well, I guess it'll depend on what your facility's programs are as to what happens with those. I've been to buildings before that haul all that bad wood out to an area in the truck yard where a utility man or general labor associate will tear them all apart, and the wood is sold for scrap. Some places take it a step further and have table saws, nail guns, and a little new wood out there to replace the slats or runners, maybe add those hated double runners down the sides of our pallets even. Oh, and those little metal plates, has anyone ever seen those plates really be effective? You know, they usually place them over a cracked runner, nail them in place, and they're supposed to keep the crack from growing. As I mentioned, in all of our positions, we carry the responsibility of making sure the pallets that we're using are fit to be stored in the racks. The product we're hauling and moving around can weigh several thousand pounds. I had a supervisor tell me a great story about a pallet runner that had caught a bad pallet on his front docks. It appears an over-the-road driver was working his load, almost a straight pull-off, and he even stated in the driver's defense that the right outside runner couldn't really be seen due to a slip sheet being folded down against the board. The runner, being very cautious with any hanging plastic or cardboard, that was hanging over the surface area, had gone over to cut the excess or the overhang off of the slip sheet and noticed the cracked runner. The driver gladly restacked the item onto another pallet and stacked the bad board to the side to carry back with him. And that kind of brings us to another thing about pallets that we probably ought to talk about. In many instances, our carriers will require that we replace the pallet count for them. All that really means is, like this guy, let's say he rolled off 24 pallets for us to receive, we'd give him 24 comparable pallets back to take back with him. Pallets are expensive. Now, not all drivers or loads will want to take them back either. They could be on their way to pick up another load and won't really have the room for them. That's really just kind of a win for our facility. Or it is if his or her pallets were in good condition in the first place. I've seen companies make a driver take back their wood or charge them a little disposal fee for leaving them. That's one of the ways those pick up and deliver pallet companies I mentioned earlier can come in handy. I don't think we talked about how that actually worked. It's simple, really. I think that's why we're seeing so many companies using them. Typically, they will leave us an empty trailer on the yard, and we'll fill them up with all of our bad wood. They come by and pick it up. Some of them work off of a schedule each week, or we'll just give them a call whenever we get it filled up. Anyway, they'll take our bad wood, rework what they can or build what they have to, and sell them back to us at a contracted price. Pallets can be a nuisance, any way you look at them, but one of those necessary evils. That's one of the tools that we use to perform our task with, right? Another supervisor was telling me how he'd ran out of pallets on the inbound side. It's happened to all of us. Come on, you're shaking your head up and down. Best laid plans. He had to send everyone down the aisles to pull all the empty pallets from the pick slots just to get his trucks unloaded. I laugh about it, but it's not all that unusual. The bad thing is that a good number of those pallets aren't of quality to use again. Think about it. Let's say the pallet started out as barely even a B grade. The unloaders tossed it around. A pallet runner has drove under it. I guess probably at least once or twice, and probably at least one fork driver's driven into it. Now, what's the odds we all performed our task properly? Of course, I hope we have. That is each of our responsibility. And I hated hearing this one, and it comes up all too often, really. An employee was caught selling pallets right off of the dock. Now, he wasn't actually selling his company's wood, but that was a bit of a fine hair to split. All of that wood that the drivers did want to haul back, he'd gather up right outside the doors, and he had a buddy that would come by in a pickup truck and they'd load them up. I guess they had a pallet company that would pay them by the pallet. Of course, he was let go. Come on, at the very least he was conducting other business while he was on the company's clock. I felt bad for him. Well, it was just a bad decision. I don't want to get into the CHEP pallet program or the PICO program, but there's a lot of responsibility there in keeping up with those commission pallets too. They're really great programs, but our companies have to have a very solid accounting system in place for it not to be a headache. But again, it's our responsibility to follow all those programs and make them work. And don't get me wrong, I love their wood, a very sturdy product. Heavier pallets, but we as stockers don't have to worry about them giving way. As a forklift driver, I always worried about what I was staging up in the racks. If I was going up to the 6th or 7th level with some weight, I'd always do a double take on the pallet as I was lifting it. I didn't want any of my loads falling. I've taken more than one load back up to the docks and had them restacked. I don't take any chances. I mentioned the different grades of pallets earlier. I won't go through them all, but I've always used, nazpallet.com to help explain the different grades. I'll add that link in today's show notes. I know I have it around here somewhere. According to them, a great premium grade A pallet will have 7 boards on top, 5 boards on the bottom, 6-inch lead boards on top and bottom both. The average top decking will be spaced somewhere between 2.5 inches and 3.5 inches. It'll have 3 stringers or runners on it, of course have 4-way entry, and that's a really good pallet. In a regular grade A, it'll have 7 boards on top, 5 boards on bottom. The same with the average decking space. The 3 stringers or runners, of course, 4-way entry. And it shouldn't have any block repairs to those stringers. And each stringer could have, like one repair plate to strengthen any of those splits. Of course, B-grade pallets can be much cheaper, and they are generally going to be used for shipping. They're graded really in much the same way. Between 6 to 7 boards on top, depending on the board width, which can be 3.5 to 5.5 inches wide. It'll have no less than 4 boards on bottom. Now, the average deck spacing could be a little bit bigger, between 2.5 inches up to 4 inches, and that's more than enough room to twist an ankle with. Of course, we've learned to never walk on a pallet anyway, right? It should have 3 stringers. It'll have 4-way entry. They'll typically have some plugs or repairs on those stringers. You've seen those added blocks of wood nailed over, any split or broken runners. Shouldn't have more than 2 boards, the stringers thick at any one point. In other words, they shouldn't all be doubled. And it could have some chips or partial split boards, and those will really probably be acceptable. I keep mentioning the responsibility word again today. As you've probably picked up on by now, what we do can be dangerous, and it's so important we all take care of each other. Every position touches another. Be sure to check out that March episode. You'll learn more about pallets than you ever wanted to know. Well, I veered off track again this week. Think about your pallets, though. Everyone has a good pallet story to tell, and I bet we can all learn something about them. Or maybe at least what not to do with them. Until next week, be safe, everybody. Put to practice what we know is right. Let's all punch out and go home every day.